I mean, you agree conflict theory is, I mean, that Marx created conflict theory, right?
I'm
Pushed
not
it at
sure. I'm
least.
not sure I do agree. Can you say more about what you mean by that? Surely everyone who's involved in like the French Revolution or I don't know, Spartacus's revolt in ancient Rome, believed that there's that society involves conflict between people where some people are oppressing other people or
First question I want to
yeah
ask
yeah
was, it's kind
yeah
of related
sure
to
yeah
all of this culture war stuff because
yeah
how do you describe yourself as like a classical Marxist, and like how do you feel about the term class reductionist?
yeah. So I would I would describe myself as a Marxist. I'm not going to give you 5 minutes of caveats. If that kind
Right.
of which is in the conversation, we can do it, right? But like broadly speaking, there is a view about history and there's a view about how capitalist economies work that I agree with there. And I think that's like a useful shorthand for saying that. I think as far as class reductionism, I mean, it's part. I mean, part of the problem with class reductionism is it's so vague and it always kind of sounds like it's saying something that
Hmm.
it's not quite saying. Like it sort of sounds like when you call somebody a class reductionist, you're saying they just like literally don't care about anything but that. But of course, if that's what it means, it's inaccurate like 99.9% of the time that it's applied to people. If it means that you think there are strategic reasons to emphasize class, or it means that you think that by and large, not completely, but by and large, the sort of biggest problems with kind of injustice in advanced democratic capitalist countries are about the distribution of wealth and resources and economic power. If that's what it means, then I think class reductionism is just correct. It's good. And again, I think it's often, I think people who throw it around often aren't really clear what they mean. But I've gotten to a point where when I hear it, I hear somebody described as a class reductionist. I'm like, oh, okay, so they're probably like smart and worth checking out.
Hmm. There's
Let
like
me
been
let me
a
check in for just this. Did you
yeah.
say that you wouldn't classify yourself as a Marxist?
Oh no, I said I would. I just
Okay, okay.
I just
I
tried to
I
just
list
very quickly put a little
Right.
nuance around that,
right,
but
right.
I
I
would.
I listed you as a Marxist
Yeah,
author
yeah.
just for the purposes of
No,
this
no, I'm
conversation. So
I'm
I
totally happy.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah,
Go ahead,
Because
Sitch.
yeah, well, no, because so it's been, I'm sure you're aware, there's
yeah.
been a long controversy for the last few years that's sort of been about CRT and then wokeness in
Mhm.
general around like, is it rooted in Marxism? Is it Marxism? How do you feel about all these claims?
Yeah. So okay. So I guess two things. One is that um, I would. I don't think we can talk about this without just really quickly noting that um, that CRT is one of these terms that like has a sort of specific meaning. It's often used in a much broader way. I think if we get into it more, we're going to have to start making some of those distinctions. But
Hmm.
if we're talking about like real CRT, like Derek Bell, people like that, people
Yeah,
who are like real,
Crenshaw, yeah, all those people. Yeah.
sure, Kimberly Crenshaw, yeah. Yeah, people like Kimberly Crenshaw and Derek Bell, that like real academic critical race theorists. Yeah, I don't think. Um, I mean, is it rooted in Marxism? I mean, I think if you say like, that like it's Marxism is an important enough part of the intellectual history of the last couple hundred years that is going to be like any kind of influence on lots of things, then sure. But like the idea that people have that this is some kind of like half Marxism or semi Marxism, or it's like, or like rebranded Marxism or something, I think is totally wrong. I think if it
Hmm.
were, I would like it a lot more. In fact, a lot of my objection to a lot of this stuff is that I think it's not actually particularly Marxist. It's it's not. Um, it's that it sort of positions race as having this analytical role in explaining certain things that I actually just don't find helpful. And it also just normatively, in terms of what the goal is, like what do we actually want? What would we consider a just society? Honestly, to me, I mean, and I know people say I'm straw manning it because I think somebody like Derek Bell kind of wants to have it both ways on this, but a lot of that stuff strikes me as saying that like the goal is that we should we should have like a much more racially diverse ruling class that it's kind of, I mean, maybe just to straw man just a little bit, right? I mean, like we have, we should have a more demographically proportional board of directors of Lockheed Martin. And I think that's just a totally different goal than you have if what your basic objection is to like class inequality in the first place, not just to who gets to rise up the ladder, but like whether that kind of ladder is there in the first place.
So when you say so you don't characterize it as Marxist, is it
Definitely
just
not.
purely based on the end goal, or is there some quality to Marxism specifically that it lacks?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about Marxism, by and large, you're talking about two things. One is a theory of history, a theory of how it is that different modes of production, feudalism, capitalism, slavery, whatever, kind of rise and fall over the course of history, and why, and how those are related to what kind of legal and political institutions you have. And the other is a theory sort of specifically about the capitalist mode of production, about how capitalist economies work. And I really don't think that critical race theory has much to do with either one of those. I mean, and to me, when I see people saying that, well, it's kind of Marxism or anything like that, it seems like what they're saying is often like, well, there's certain kind of claims where if you do a global search and replace throughout the Word document and replace all the racial terms with economic terms, then it kind of sort of sounds like Marxism. To which I would just say, okay, but like I don't understand. If you go through the Gospels and do a search and replace where Jesus becomes Hitler, then the New Testament sounds a lot worse. But I don't, I guess I never really get what follows from that.
Right. Well, the argument, to my understanding, as someone who's read way too much CRT literature, is that essentially they took. It seems like a lot of the CRT people were, obviously it's directly from it's a critical theory, so obviously it's kind of derived. It's derived from critical legal studies, which was more explicitly Marxist. And it's, derived from Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. And they essentially took a lot of the aspects of Marxism, including the history, the lens of history that you're talking about, and kind of the oppression lens. And they kind of just took out, as you said, they kind of took out all the class elements and replaced them with race elements. And I can understand why, as someone who's a classical Marxist, you're like, this is crap. But for someone who's not a Marxist, I do think it would be fair to say, well, I mean, you can argue that replacing class with race, changes the nature of it, maybe away from Marxism, but it definitely took the framework of Marxism and kind of switched it around a little bit.
Yeah, so I guess two thoughts about that. One, one, I think that like just sort of saying there's some kind of oppressor-oppressed thing going on there really doesn't go very far in the direction of Marxism, because the idea that there's oppression is a thing that exists, that sometimes like one group of people treats another group of people unjustly, which is all.
Well, I meant in terms of conflict theory specifically, but
okay, but that there's like conflict between different groups, that they have there's conflict between different groups that could be described as oppression. I mean, that's like insanely broader than Marxism. Like that's I mean, surely everyone who was involved in like the French Revolution, or I don't know, Spartacus's revolt in ancient Rome, believed that there's that society involved conflict between people, where some people were oppressing other people, or like I don't know, Mary Shelley, writing the Vindication of the Rights of Women, sort of founding feminism decades before Marx is born. Like,
well, you agree conflict theory is, I mean, that Marx created conflict theory, right?
I'm not sure I do agree. Can you say more about that?
Like the whole idea that society is composed of these different groups in society that are kind of fighting each other over some kind of limited resource. I thought Marx created this, but am I incorrect?
I guess I don't think so. I mean, you go back to like Aristotle in ancient Greece, and he talks about classes, and he seems to think that there are different groups in society that are in conflict with each other. I mean, I guess in his case, he thinks that the sort of solution to that is kind of balancing, is like a balancing act. I mean, it's definitely not the people at the bottom like winning and reformatting society. But
Mhm.
yeah, that does. I think that sort of claims that society involves conflict between different groups is, I mean, certainly like, I mean, there's so many non-Marxists who've believed that, including before Marx, that I just don't find associating that with Marxism very helpful or or
Well, right. Is there some, so like because if you
yeah.
look up conflict theory and everyone associates it with Marx, what are they talking about? Is there some other criteria to this or?
I mean, this is I mean, again, if conflict theory, I mean, maybe they're using it in a more fine-grained way than the way that we've been discussing it for the last couple of minutes. But I mean,
Mhm.
again, if they just mean that there's conflict between different groups, then I would disagree with people who say this. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, I'd kind of want a little bit more than just like there are lots of people who, there are lots of people who say this to kind of change my mind about it.
Well, well, I guess I'm asking you, so I mean, I'm assuming that you,
Yeah.
as a Marxist, know, like, have read about this. So when they talk about conflict theory and when you look it up and everyone throws it at Marx or associates it with Marx, what are they referencing, I guess?
Well, I mean, conflict theory isn't really a term that Marxists use.
Hmm.
That's not, maybe like a certain kind of Marxist academic, but I mean, it's certainly in the kinds of Marxist, either just sort of regular political or more theoretical discussions that I'm familiar with. Right?
Hmm.
That's not a term I see thrown around. I mean, I mean, the conversation that comes to mind for me where somebody was talking about conflict theory was a couple of years ago on Enter the Void, and that guy's, I think, just kind of a liberal. So I don't, I think that might just be different traditions of how to talk about this stuff. But like whether there's something called like, I guess maybe zooming out a little bit, if that's okay. Like if you say that conflict theory, comes from Marxism and this sort of comes from some kind of conflict theory, what that sounds to me like is it's ultimately like a genealogical claim. Like you trace back some chain of influence and you get to Marxism. But to me, that's not very informative because even if it's true, I mean, then like I still don't think that tells you very much about how to classify the end result. I mean, you trace back, Marxism itself has all kinds of influences from like early Enlightenment liberalism, but I mean, I'm sure that you wouldn't think that it basically just therefore is that, right? Like they have like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah, no,
know,
I want to be clear. I'm not trying to
uh,
peg you to say, yes, Sitch, CRT is Marxist. That's not really what I'm trying to get at.
okay,
I'm just, and as you said, obviously Marxism had,
uh,
inspirations from liberalism, though I assume, obviously you would agree that Marx and Marxism is a critique of liberalism. So I wouldn't really say it's like within the
okay,
same,
but like
vein of it.
a lot of the stuff you're talking about is actually critiques of Marxism,
Right,
or
right,
critiques of original form Marxism, right? So
right.
so there we would have a parallel, right?
Yeah,
Between,
okay, that's fair. Yeah. But
yeah,
so, but I mean, the way that I perceive it from a lot of the CRT literature I've read is that they did, even if you don't want to call it Marxist, that's fine, but they did take, it looks like to me, a lot of the framework and structure of Marxism, and they kind of just swapped out class with race. They definitely did not seem to be taking the framework of liberalism and doing that.
okay. So two thoughts about that. One is just for the record, I'm not yet convinced about that there is that much meaningfully, from the structure. Certainly, when I've seen people before try to kind of unpack this claim in essays and stuff,
Hmm.
everything that they're describing as a structure is just seems awfully minimal to me. So that's one thing. Then the other thing is, look, if you swap out class with race, then um, that's a pretty dramatic swap. I mean,
Right.
that's like you've completely changed the meaning of every single one of these sentences to the point that it's unrecognizable. And the people who say the second sentence are now ideological enemies of the people who say the first sentence, because these are competing explanations of the world.
Hmm. Are you familiar with Hans Moeller? He wrote the book on prophylicity and authenticity.
No, I haven't read that.
Oh, okay. No, because we talked to him. I think
Yeah,
he is also,
yeah.
he said he was a Marxist, right, Adam? Am I
I'm
misremembering
not
that?
sure. Yeah.
Or he was a socialist. And he, I mean, he was kind of, we had kind of similar conversation. And he made, I mean, he made the same argument, which is that, yeah, if you swap out race for class, then it kind of makes it by its nature not Marxism anymore, which I mean, I'm not going to argue that. I think that's fine. It's just to me, the thing that's interesting to me, and the reason why I kind of want to make this distinction is
Yeah.
because it seems like with CRT and a lot of wokeness, which I'd all kind of argue stems from similar ways of thinking, is that essentially there's a bunch of mainstream liberals and Democrats kind of wandering around in America who have been duped essentially into thinking a lot of woke stuff is the continuation of the liberal civil rights movement when it's not really. It's really this kind of completely different way of thinking about the world. And
Mhm.
that's kind of why I want to hone in and say, like, look, this is not, I mean, if you don't want to say it's Marxism, it's fine, but it's definitely not rooted in liberalism.
I don't know. I mean, what's the like? I part of the problem with this is that liberalism is one of those words that means really, really different things in
Mm-hmm.
different contexts, right? Like, so, you talk to libertarians and they'll tell you, no, 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 we're liberals, right? Because we're, we believe in classical liberalism, or at least like a kind of libertarian
Right.
will say that. But then, like, certainly for the last close to a century in the United States, one of the main things that liberalism means is like New Deal liberalism, which
Mm-hmm.
is, obviously very different from libertarianism. I think historically, a lot of what people have often meant, I mean, look, there's a certain sense of, there are things that people mean by liberalism that it's like, yeah, if that's what you mean, sure, I'm a liberal.
What do you
But
mean by it, Sitch?
Well, I mean, trying to maximize the freedom of the individual, that the individual needs protections from society, that the individual is generally like the most important unit that you want to focus on, and that things should be structured in terms of the individual needs to be protected from the group as opposed to the group being protected from the individual. Classical kind of John
And you're
Lockean
saying
sort of
CRT is
liberalism.
against that.
And see, yeah, CRT is explicitly against that kind of individuation.
I mean, with the possible exception of the last part, like the last thing you said about the groups don't need to be protected against individuals, and I would kind of push on what that means a little bit. But with the
Mhm.
possible exception of that last part, everything else you just said, like, yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that that's
Okay.
all
So you agree
obvious.
that's liberalism, right?
Well, I think that it's one thing that liberalism can mean, and this
Hmm.
goes to my point, because what I said when I said I think that's right is, other than maybe the last sentence, everything you
Right.
just said, it's like, yeah, if that's what liberalism means, I'm a liberal, right? Like that's I think that's completely compatible with socialism. In fact, I would argue it all gives us a really,
Really?
I think it's definitely, yeah, no question.
Oh, he's making my argument, Sitch.
Do you want to bring that up, Adam, now, or you want to say that for
I
later?
don't, but
Okay.
I was just pointing it out. Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.